All right, hello. Apologies for being a little bit late. Just want to make sure my audio and everything is working as well. Um, Looks like we should be set up. Okay. Um, what are we doing here today? So apologies as I had to do an update and reboot. But the point of this is to talk a little bit about developer experience. I'm working on some projects, and occasionally I need to evaluate a new tool, looking for things that provide solutions to problems I have while building something. And so as a result, I'm signing up for some services just also to become familiar with them and everything, and thought it would be useful to share a little bit about what I'm doing, and see what I learned along the way. So, just to give a bit more background to that. So my name's Jason. I do work in the developer experience space. Have been project lead, tech lead, and everything in between. The point here is I am looking at services I haven't used before. So I do want to offer up a few things as far as a code of conduct, that my intention is to be kind, even though it may come across as criticism in some cases. What I'm looking to do is be a little bit more growth oriented by looking at products and seeing, well, does this solve a problem I have in what I'm building, either today or something in the future? I am looking and saying, hey, what works really well about this onboarding experience? Because that might be something I need to replicate in any developer facing tools that I build. But also looking at it from, hey, this is not as effective. And so maybe these are things that we can learn from and try to find a better alternative to. So all of that is to say that good developer experience is hard work, and I don't want to be disparaging of other people who may have put a lot of time and energy into some of the things I'm taking a peek at. So the purpose of the show, or at least the framework of which I'm organizing it, is around this communication strategy idea that goes way back, communications marketing, advertising, about this idea that you might only really have 3 seconds to make an impression. And there was an API Days talk that's sometimes credited with applying this to the developer experience space or API design space, and saying that you have 3 seconds really to get a point across about what an API is for, 30 seconds for somebody to find an entry point, and 3 minutes to be able to create an account, execute a call, and use the result. Some might call this metric something along the lines of the time to hello world. Personally, I think 3 minutes is pretty aggressive. And maybe that's just I don't read fast enough. I don't know. So I think for me, 30 minutes to have a good first impression is perfectly reasonable. And quite frankly, it may be a couple of days before I actually get a proof of concept for my actual use case up, because it's not just about the service I'm trying to use. It's about it in the context of what I'm building and whether all of the things play nicely together. And that's where the rubber really hits the road in terms of having something effective. So um, one way of evaluating developer experience, and this is something I've used in teams I've been part of, is around customer zero. It's this idea that before giving a product to uh, an actual customer, that you have someone internal evaluate it. So it's not exactly like saying testing in production. Like without this process, you might build something and you throw it out there, and then suddenly someone uses a different web framework than you accounted for. They run it on a different web browser or platform than you expected. Suddenly you're in a real world environment and you may not mirror what you've tested internally. So I think customer zero is an opportunity to invite people who don't necessarily contribute directly to the product, as analogs to what the end customer may experience, and saying, hey, take what we've provided, and this talks about the entire range of things: documentation, sample apps and code, tooling, the whole 9 yards. And so it goes a little bit beyond quality assurance or quality control, and saying like, hey, can we actually mirror a real world scenario when I'm actually trying to build something, and I didn't take part in building it, and I'm using it in a way that maybe wasn't anticipated? Can I create useful learning resources as a part of that? And that might be part of the onboarding experience for the next person. I'm also going to say I've been working in the industry for quite some time, but I think it's okay not to know how to do something. So I am kind of doing the show with the idea that I don't know everything. And so in some cases, I'm looking for an API to take some of that burden off of me, right? That's kind of the point. So I'm looking to different tools that I haven't used before. So there is a learning curve that comes with that. But it is also the idea that if I knew how to build it myself, I might not be looking to that tool. So hence, not necessarily knowing the right questions to ask sometimes. And that's why I'm also doing this in public. Is that maybe there's other people that do have the right questions to ask or can contribute to this learning process. But the flip side of it is, if you're doing a usability study, there's this notion of friction logging, right? Like keeping a written log of what's happening, what's causing frustration, what's complex, or is very difficult to understand or figure out what the next step might be. And by keeping a record of that, you can go back and annotate it and say, like, oh, here's where the things we can improve. Here are the things that are working really well. We don't want to lose. Um, but one of the ways I've actually found quite compelling for doing this type of process is just having a scheduled review. So, I mean, I think I learned about user centered design and human factors long, long time ago about doing usability studies, and you get someone in a room. And so it's basically the same idea here is that instead of just recording it myself, I am broadcasting it because why not? But it does give me a recorded session of what I'm experiencing. So instead of me trying to stop in the moment and grab a screenshot, or to stop in the moment and copy an error message, I'm just going to have the recording at the end of it, so I can go back and be like, oh yeah, here were the best practices that should be repeated, and here's the error I saw and what led up to that error. It gives a little bit more context, especially if you can monologue and explain what you're hearing. So that's one reason I'm doing the show, is that you're seeing sort of that process as well. So, you know, I am doing these intermittently. It is just kind of a little side project of something I'm working on when I have time available, in the spirit of that 3:33 kind of pattern. Doing the shows at 3:30 p.m. Pacific time, which is my local time. And I'm sending the broadcast out to Twitch and YouTube. But I do have a website, and by website, I mean a text file that you can find some of the upcoming tools and services that I'm interested in trying out, and maybe haven't used in a project before. So you can go and see what those are coming up in case there's something in the future that you're in particularly interested in. So today I'm looking at a company I inadvertently heard about called Knock. They're in the sort of maybe messaging infrastructure space. I do need a solution for that. I'm also going to be looking later this week at Sanity, because I am still looking for a way of managing content with API, rather than doing it all in static web or setting up my own database. I'm looking to other services, and I still don't have a solution for user management yet. So Auth0 is one I'm obviously very familiar, or I shouldn't say obviously, but is well known out there, and affiliated with Okta, obviously, or not obviously, but I guess that's a little verbal tick I've got. But so I'm going to look at Auth0 because I do still want a user authentication system, and I don't want to have to deal with all of the security infrastructure on my own. So with that in mind, this is really just about like saying, hey, let's go. Let's just try something out and get started. So that's it for the presentation. And as I mentioned, there's a tool out there I saw on a list called Knock. Now, Knock obviously being, it could be anything, not knock jokes or whatever. So I'm going to say Knock API. And just see what I see. I usually do, when evaluating something, start with a Google search. I find that's to be pretty helpful to see what shows up first. Sometimes competition shows up, so I'll learn about other services similar to the one I'm looking for. I might find a tutorial or guides that are not written by the company. Often I will look to third-party sources as a way of verifying whether something makes sense for me to use and can trust in a project or not. And some of those are factors that go into my decision making, but hopefully it also gives me a place to start. So Knock API is, I believe, what I am looking for, right? So it's notifications infrastructure. I don't want to set up my own messaging bus or anything like that. If I can use a third party service to do that for me, I think I might actually prefer that approach for now. So I see that it is their domain is knock.app. So that's something just to be useful. It does look like they have a documentation reference, API reference, as well as documentation. Okay, so there's their Zendesk articles. They have a Python SDK. I could look a little bit more into that, or the Node SDK is probably what I'll be using since I'm looking at a web application as well. Excuse me a second. Apologies. Um, all right. Well, there's not a whole lot of information here quite yet, but let's just go in through the front door. Now, let's go ahead and change the layout here a little bit, just so you can hopefully see a little bit more clearly what I'm looking at. Um, hmm. Or maybe. Yeah, we'll just do that way. Okay. The most powerful notification system you'll never build, right? That's actually a pretty nice tagline, I'd say, right? It's a notification system. I don't have to build it. I can just use one. So that is, kind of speaking to what I'm looking for as well. I don't usually look at marketing sites too often. But occasionally I do, just to see a couple keywords or if there is something that's pretty useful. Um, I One of the reasons is statements like this. Watch someone integrate it in 5 minutes. That does speak to the 333 kind of mindset of, oh, in 3 minutes you should be up and running. But I've been babbling for over 3 minutes, so like, is that 5 minutes even realistic or not? I don't know. I think if you know what you're doing and you're in an environment and certain factors line up, maybe. But I think that also sets a unrealistic expectation in some ways. Um, let's see. Let's see. I don't recognize too many of these names other than Vercel. But it's interesting that this is being used in other tools. So, okay. Ship product notifications in hours, not months. So, really talking about this message, I guess, is really the key. Built for developers. Knock Labs. I bring in the SDK. Notify. So I don't know. I mean, this looks like, it's the fact I can look at this does make it feel like real code. So maybe this is what their API looks like. I do like to take a peek. I'm not going to trust necessarily what I see on this page. I'm going to go look at it a little bit more in context, just because sometimes this might come from more of a marketing source as opposed to a technical source. But I think it goes into selling points and things like that. But for me, I at the early stage, I'm not really looking for that type of information. So the next thing I often do is I do find myself quite a bit looking around, trying to get a little bit of orientation. So just to see like what else might be here in case I want to come back to it later. Template management. Okay, so that's, what does this tell me? This seems to indicate that notifications, I can trigger a notification, but they're going to be powered by a template with maybe some variables that fit into place. Right, so it's dear username kind of idea. In-app notifications is more what I was thinking about, as opposed to like messages. I am thinking more about like notifications. Observability. Workflow engine. That's interesting. I wonder what they're going to be doing with that. Preferences. So I guess the idea there, maybe I would be able to use some user preferences around notifications and store it through Knock as opposed to necessarily needing to build it on my own. That could be interesting. Integrations. Okay. Integrations I find to be useful too, because to me it sends a signal of whether or not this service is being used, or can be used with other things I may be using. So right off the bat, I see all of the email services that to me suggests that they actually went through with this idea of sending email notifications from your application. And so so they work, I see the big names here, so that's a good sign, as well as text messages. Okay. Push notifications, chat, and so on. Okay. It's actually kind of nice to see that many integrations, but there's also sources, customer data platforms. And if you're ever wondering where I get some of the tools I'm looking at for the show in general, it is things like this where I'm like, I don't know anything about Rudder's Stack or Polytomic or Fresh Paint. So suddenly those three become okay. Well, maybe I need to go take a look and learn a little bit more about them. If they showed up in this category, it might be something I would want to know about at some point. Um, this is so ETLs that to me suggest a much more lower level messaging infrastructure as well. So that's interesting. Okay, so documentation, quick start, so on. So presumably, one other thing I do before signing up, I do want to look at the pricing real quick, um, just because I have gotten burned where I get a little bit too far along and then suddenly realize. Um, I need to put in a credit card, and those sorts of things that maybe if I'm not ready to commit to the service yet and I'm still evaluating it, I'm not going to get the corporate card out and go that whole 9 yards. Um, so this is saying $0, $0 a month, up to 10,000 notifications. So it does seem like a getting started for free approach, which is helpful. So I am ready to go ahead and sign it, or get started, I suppose. So this would be the sign in. I don't have an account yet, so I got to get started. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and sign up. I don't know what other people think of this. I never sign up with linked accounts. I don't know. It's just one of those things where on the one hand, it's convenient to not have to remember as many passwords, but in this case, it doesn't look like that's the case either, right? So they do send a notification, which is proof in my, it's nice to see that, oh, they're going to actually use, um, the thing that they're selling. So this is what that email looks like. It's just a login link. Okay, oops. All right. Um, okay. So it looks like I have to pick some names as part of their sign up, which is not a problem. And it looked like it gave me a unique URL or reference. So stay updated, subscribe to the newsletter. It's okay for now. I join our Slack community, not yet. Follow us on Twitter, not yet. Um, it's I'm going to pause here and say it is interesting that they have this before I've even gotten in yet. It does suggest a higher level of commitment than I've reached at this point. Presumably, these are all easy for me to see later on as well. But I think a lot of times when I get to a screen like this, we'll see where this continue takes me. But I think it's the learning resources or the quick start, those sorts of things I'd be looking for. Um, and I do notice I did get an email from them already. Let's see what it says and if it's helpful information. Um, it's interesting what I ended up landing, but product notifications, quick start guide, um, building in-app UI docs, app feeds, inboxes, and toasts in a matter of minutes. Learn from the example apps or incorporate them into your own. project. Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna maybe example apps might be useful. Um, Not necessarily because I start from them, but it does give me a little indication of the types of things I can build. So, hence, I don't necessarily go look at the. Yeah, I think there are probably two different ways of thinking about learning a new technical product. You might I tend to think of myself more as a constructionist. I like to start with a blank page and layer in only the things I need. Other people may start from here's a full sample app and then be able to just sort of use that to take out the things that they don't need and go the opposite direction, or maybe they just leave the parts they don't need there and just ignore them. Um, but I think the other side is, I am working on a project, so I already have a code base. So taking an example app and the idea that I would use that to build my new product or my new tool doesn't make sense to me. So that's one reason. I like the idea of example apps, but I think some people misunderstand what their purpose is. Um, or so, and by people I mean like maybe business decision makers. Learn more about integrating Knock into your web apps. So, um, okay, so this looks like just one Node and React example, which is fine. Anyway, I'll skip that. And we're going to come back again to this page it dropped me in. So I would assume that this is a dashboard. It's interesting that it has this little graph look in the background, but create a channel to start sending notifications, identify users, create a workflow. I guess I should create a channel. Okay. In app. Well, okay, so integrations, channels. I mean, it makes the terminology. You send messages across a channel and subscribe across a channel, right? Like this is a notification. But I think at this point, before it's I see little notifications, and that's why I'm interested here. Um, but I'm really getting distracted. Most likely, I'm going to go back and not to that link, but I want to go to the documentation and to this quick start. This is probably where I want to be at this point. So, with that all in mind, I've evaluated, in terms of the 333 kind of benchmarking, you know, at this point, I don't know how far in. I started a little bit late, but it took me a little bit of time to figure out what is knock, where get a little bit oriented, sign up for an account, those sorts of things that explain what I was doing. But I'm going to go ahead and get started trying to use it now. Um, Integrate knock with your backend web application and send your first notification. Create a knock account. Already did that. Log into the dashboard. Did that. Add the knock SDK to your backend. Okay, so I'm gonna go grab my VS Code, and I do need to start a new project here. Okay, what do I want to do? So I am not gonna go. So this is another part of evaluating, right? Is that ultimately it will have to work within the environment I'm working in, but I'm not going to go and install this into my. I mean, I could create a branch and go, um, you know, go ahead and do that, but that's not really what I want. The it just creates a little bit cruft in my project, so I don't really like to do that. I might be in the middle of something else, so I'm just going to go ahead and create a new app. I've been using Svelte quite a bit lately, so we'll just do a skeleton project. Okay. And then, all right, let's jump back here and are saying to npm install. So let's go ahead and do that. And for that matter, I have to npm install everything, and then I can run the sample app here. Okay. So I just have a little basic app here for now. Actually, maybe I'll. Sorry, I'm going to split the screen. Hopefully, it's still readable for anyone that cares to read along with me. Maybe I'll go in more of this orientation. Okay. So I did the install. So I'm going to have to grab my keys under the developer section of the dashboard. Down here. Okay. So I'm going to copy. Now, do I need it? So they're calling theirs knock API key, which seems fine. So I'm going to go ahead over here. Oops. Knock API key and knock API secret. All right. Sorry, I'm just going to do that off window if you don't mind. So I've copied my key. And that's my secret key, and this is my public key. That's interesting. What I'm thinking, you know, I don't know, maybe I've gotten into the pattern of seeing one called, I mean, I guess pretty good privacy or, other, it's sort of the key secret, right? Here, just because they're using the key in both labels, I actually initially just made a quick mistake, and I put my secret key as my public and my API key, and so in other words, I got these backwards basically, um, thinking key first and then secret, but the fact that the key was here. So I think obviously I figured it out right away anyway, but that's a good example of just like a little usability thing where especially if I did get them backwards and then I keep going through this quick start guide and get authentication failures, I might be confused. I might go off running and trying to figure out, well, wait, why is my environment not picking up the settings, that kind of thing. So lots to consider in that regard. So I'm going to go ahead and source my environment and then run that again. Okay, so presumably I've got my environment variable set up. Okay, create a workflow. Next, we'll create our first workflow via the dashboard. Hey, somebody's watching. Okay. So the workflow encapsulation takes a trigger call via the knock API, runs the data you provide. Okay, so I'm going to have to do this in the dashboard. So I'm going to switch this over to this window for a moment and we can go back here. It says create a workflow. So if I go over to this workflow, create workflow, name it whatever you like. We'll just call it customer zero or DX test, DX audit. Yeah, sure. Um, Unique, lowercase, dashes only. That's the way I prefer to do things as well, especially if working in a team. It's actually kind of a feature to be able to make everyone have to be a little bit more consistent. I'll check out our templates. I think again that might be the email messaging case, so I'm not doing that right now. All right, so I've created a workflow. Now I've got to add a channel, at least one channel step. Um, Edit steps. Okay. Delay, batch, fetch, branch, throttle. So I think in my scenario, I wanted to send an in-app notification. I guess something like that. And then, okay. Um, hmm, enable link tracking now. I don't need a template or any conditions for now. Okay. Hmm. So is that it? And then I guess I have to commit. Trigger this. I think I'm a little confused on what I'm supposed to be doing here. Add a channel step. Design a notification. When your channel is configured, head back to the workflow's channel step and click create to create its notification template. So grab the trigger payload. So I think the step three, I'm getting a little lost. It's maybe giving me a little bit of too many options for this stage of where I'm at. Um, and I think that is one of the hardest parts about writing one of these things is trying to figure out what is the one use case that would help everyone. And I think this might be trying to do too much for too many maybe paths. If I'm being transparent about where my mindset is here, where it's like, well, wait, now I don't know if I did the right thing here. I seem to have diverged a little bit. Um, in terms of what it's doing. I'm not quite sure how it connected to this integration I had already done before. And maybe it's this name. Did I do in-app or should I say, what did I call it? Let's call it my app channel or something instead, right? If I go back to this, I named this one a little bit more deliberately. Okay, so this is going to my app. So it is connected to this integration. So that's not good. I'm happy to see this dashboard did maintain some internal consistency there. That I renamed it, and then my workflow still sees it. But I'm confused. Design a notification. Because it seems like when I go here, it wants me to hit create, but I'm not sure I see a create. So I think I'm I'm probably gonna confuse myself by the fact that I have a different key than the name, but that's okay. Um, what happens if I skip through the step? Like, I feel like this is general guidance, which is perhaps helpful if I understood the service at a deeper level already, but I don't yet. So some of this information is being lost to me right now. Um, and then it goes into triggering the workflow, and then the list of users to notify. So, what I was thinking I was going to be doing was having something similar to what I saw here, right? Like a little notification widget like this. That I suppose it would be specific to some users, but I might be actually trying to broadcast an update to all users, and then each individual user would have a read state and or dismiss state for that notification. So I think that is what I think I'm trying to make. Um, so to that end, the users to notify. This is a sample. I just went ahead and bootstrapped this real quick. I don't have my user management system. And even if I did, I'm not sure. Like, this isn't email addresses. These are user IDs. Does not let me store users like here. So I guess I have to add a user. Um, I think the model. Okay. So I'm just thinking out loud a little bit here. Um, I wouldn't expect. I don't want all my users to also be here, right? Unless I was using Knock to do user authentication and everything else. Um, it is secondary data, right? Like, it's not the origin of the user record. So then it becomes a, do I need to replicate all of my users um, into this system, or can my application keep it a little bit more? Mm. So this is usually where, if you watch any of the other shows, I feel like a lot of quick start guides, it's a missed opportunity to really show an architecture diagram, and this might be somewhere else. So I think that's what I'm going to have to start exploring a little bit. So, see there, they did the right thing here. So let's see if I understand it. So I'm working on my product. I'm going to call a workflow. I might have some complex series of steps, and then an in-app feed sends messages back to my product. Okay. The only thing this isn't showing me is, yeah, okay, so there's going to be more text here I'm going to have to understand. Um, and I think that's, maybe that's in my mindset, and I don't know if others approach this learning problem differently than I do, but I think of a quick start as, don't make me think yet. I'm not trying to understand yet, but I do want to be able to get to a point where I can make something happen so that I can fidget the knobs and see what happens. Um, on the flip side, um, the overview, these other types of documents, how it all works, can be very helpful for piecing together the big pieces. So a user represents an individual that received messages. So how do I identify users? Is it just a user object? Like, does it, maybe I don't really need, so I'm going to go ahead and add a user. And so a unique identifier, which is perfect, right? But I guess that's maybe where I'm hoping that I could take my unique user ID, which is just some GUID 123. I'm not going to store a name or email address or phone number, none of those things. I just really want something to correlate the knock record with my user record from my origin store. So I guess that's what it lets me do. So I could put in other identifiers if I needed to, but that's just gonna cause problems later anyway in terms of, privacy and those sorts of things. Personally identifiable, name and email address and stuff. So if I don't even store it here, if all I have is an ID, and this presumably, let's see. So this is my record of the user, and then presumably Knock also has one, or maybe Knock doesn't care. So it could be the same. So it is all just one, or whatever record under the hood here is abstracted away from me. That's how I'm interpreting it. Okay. All right. Now trigger a workflow to notify a set of users. So that answers this back to the quick start again. That answered my question of who to notify. So presumably I have my user record, whoever's authenticated, I should be able to, maybe I'm thinking of it as a push notification to a particular ID. So when I register on that channel as a particular user with GUID 123, um, then that should work. And then data, it's the variables or whatever other message. So it does seem like okay. So I had to some way through the SDK. Presumably, I would eventually use an API to create users, but I put one in there just for starting. And then it sounds to me like I might need a template of some sort. Right? Wasn't that what it said? Create, if I come back here with a notification template. So now I need to figure out where those notification templates are. So at least from the dashboard, I'm not seeing where to get that yet. So, right. So if I'm triggering a new comment, here's the data, including the recipients. Well, the recipient has the ID. Oops, managing users. I guess I should have just read further along. Um, so maybe that's another, order matters so much, right? Because here it immediately got me to the question of what to know about users, not, scrolling far enough to see because it was below the screen for me. Not needs to know information about your users to send notifications, such as an email address. If I was connecting to a messaging system. Um, okay. Identification. Recipients. Okay. Yeah. See, this is what I was hoping for, right? Like if I just know the ID, presumably maybe even a wild card, I can send a message to everybody. Although, do I really need to send a notification? If I was sending a notification to everybody, more of a broadcast scenario, do I really want to do it this way, or would I just have a different mechanism for that? Something to consider. Alternatively, use identify. Yeah. See, I think this is the other, or at least my expectations of a quick start. Um, this is giving me choice, and it's showing me a little bit of some of the range of options. But at this stage of my learning, I feel like I need a little bit more of a constrained set of options in order to have a successful outcome. Um, and I think I've done this quite a bit myself when creating a quick start, and I think this is um, a lesson on the receiving end too, that there might be a little bit too much explanation. Um, and that's such a like I said, I think that's the thing. I tend to over explain things as well. Whereas in the quick start, maybe I really was just looking for a quick, successful outcome where I want to learn something, but I don't need to learn everything quite yet. Right. So like there are best practices and I do want to learn those things, but it feels like it might need to be sequenced or layered on to, at least that first pass of knowledge. Um, this is pointing me to other resources for learning, which is fine. And then I can go to production. But yeah, so I think there's a few things if am missing here in this quick start. What is it that I'm building was not quite clear. There's a number of steps here, but maybe this is just sort of that checklist of any project. These are the things you would need to do without a very specific outcome for me. Even though these first, couple of steps were very precise, like run this command, this is what you're going to get. Configure your environment, this is what you're going to get. And then by step three, it's getting a little bit more general, which means that, if I was building a mobile application, a web application, anything, this probably applies to that, but it is also not specific enough yet. I think I need to read the how it works in a little bit more detail to actually have success here. Because if I go back to my project, I've installed the SDK. I can go and start triggering a workflow, um, more like this one, I think. So actually, I'm interested here. So I guess I only need an API key. That was then this is the public key, right? Yeah. Find a public and secret API keys. So use the secret key for the backend. Okay. Um, hmm. Okay. So I have a workflow. It's active. I guess maybe I'll go set up my app real quick and see if I can make it receive it. So if I come, let me copy that second example because I like that it's just this. Although this would suggest I'm triggering the workflow. No, because I want to receive the notification. Uh-oh. Did we cover that here? So, I mean, I think that's maybe one, way that this could be effective for me is if I did use the dashboard and show me how to trigger that, right? So I should be able to come and I think I saw here that, well, did I send it on the dev environment or whatever? Or, if I go to the workflow, I should be able to see this test was sent. So if I use the dashboard to send one and it's an in-app message, I want my web application to be able to receive and display that it received one. But this is talking about setting up the environment, creating a workflow, triggering the workflow, publish to production. What this doesn't tell me is how to receive that notification. So I think I'm missing half of the puzzle here. So if I go back to how knock works at a high level, um, all right, okay, connect your channels, tell knock about your users, build your first workflow. I think we've done those steps here already. Trigger the workflow from your backend. Um, okay. Well, you know what? But this doesn't talk about receiving it. And I think that's the thing I'm missing still. So, here is a 5-minute demo, which can be really nice. Um, and I like that there is a video here. I think that's an example where different people learn different ways. I tend to be a little bit more visual and or want to play with things as opposed to listening. So depending on how this video is done, um, and I can't necessarily send the audio over. Oh, this is actually interesting. I wonder what this is an interesting player. I'm not recognizing it off the. Does anyone know what player this is? Oh, okay, it's Loom. Okay, that makes sense. Um, so yeah, so I think what I'm still looking for is how to receive and display the notifications. This talks quite a bit about sending them. And so I did it with the dashboard. Presumably, I could create it. So, like, if I'm sending a notification or if I'm doing something that triggers a notification from the app, um, right, like logging in triggers an email notification or something like that, or hey, someone just logged in, they're now online, and sending it to something else. I don't know. Or I've looked at this document or it's been reviewed. Those are the types of things that I imagine I'm going to need to be able to do in my application. So some of those might very well trigger from the app itself a notification. So I think this information is helpful, these first 4 steps, but it's not helping me figure out how to receive it. So I'm going to have to continue exploring, I think, in order to actually get to that stage. Um, let's see if I could find that document. So sorry, I'm going to have to do a little bit more skimming here and just see what I can find. Like if I come destination channels. Oh, and maybe this is a part of it. If I'm thinking about like, if I identify here destination and sources, and we kind of glanced at that before, maybe I missed the implication here is that for me to display in my application in-app notifications, this is what I need to integrate somehow. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is another. I jumped to the quick start right away, and this getting started. A little bit more orientation here might have actually led me to this place where I think I might need to be, which is down here. Um, yeah, and I think this is an interesting, maybe insight here too in terms of how this is being positioned. That this was not the first use case being called out. Email, push notifications to like SMS. Although, well, is this and chat apps were called out first, whereas this is actually what I want. I mean, I probably want those other things too, but like if I were doing email notifications or SMS, I probably would have been looking at other communications providers as a starting point, the ones that this is integrated with already. Um, so, but a lot of them, I don't think of them as in-app notifications or messaging. But yeah, this seems to be let's take a look at the demo. I appreciate that there might be a demo here. I think that's a very helpful proof point is this is an example application. Send an in-app notification to team A. Show toast. Hi, team A. Okay, so is that is the idea here? I could go and put this on one side, this on this side. Wait, no, that's not. Okay. Hmm. Let's go take a look at the code. So this is a Next.js example. That's cool. Um, there's documentation about it. And this is where we were before, right? Um, yeah, where am I building an app? So this is the React app example. So it's interesting to see that they do have a few different examples here. React, as well as this looks like Angular and a vanilla JavaScript example. So since I'm using Svelte, would probably be looking to this quick start right here. This is probably all said and done. I think this is the probably the document. I know I'm maybe half hour into this, but if so this I think this is an example of what I was speaking to at the top of the show, right? Was that if I had started with this document or had found this particular page faster, maybe 5 minutes was possible. But it took me, you know, um, yeah, you spend all day writing one line of code, but it's the rest of the day trying to figure out which one line you have to change, right? So I think the first 30 plus minutes of was me trying to find this page, and that this seems to be pretty close to what I was looking for. User preferences, initializing the feed. Yeah. Listen for updates. Fetch. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. And I think that's the sort of API I was maybe anticipating. So that does mean I could use the dashboard to trigger some notifications, view them, and then I could go flip it around and then set up a way of broadcasting those notifications as well, or sending them in the first place. Okay. So, I think with that in mind, I'm coming up to the hour, and I have some other work I got to get back to. So, I think I was able to sign up to an account. I don't know that I quite got to Hello World, but I was able to figure out the entry point within this hour. I do have next steps that I can take, so I think I'm not blocked. I can actually continue learning and playing with it a little bit more and take it to the next step. I think of these Let's Go series as the first hour with an app, but I think at the end of 24 hours or at the end of 8 hours might also be a really interesting checkpoint. I'll have to think about how to actually show people how far I get at that point in time, and whether it's again that 5 minute to hello world is that even a realistic or helpful metric or not. um, okay. So that was knock. I got a little bit of an idea. I got to see a demo. I found some sample code, found a tutorial that works for me. So I have a better idea of what it does. I didn't quite dive too deep into the differentiation, but that's okay. A few areas where that quick start could probably be improved might have helped me get up to speed a little bit faster, but otherwise seems reasonable. And I'll have to. I think that workflow builder could be very powerful. I'll have to play with that a little bit more and just get a feel for what I can and can't do with it. So awesome. So thanks for joining. Next time, I am looking at sanity because I do have some content I'm looking to manage from a knowledge management point of view. Some of that content will be dynamic and everything. So hence looking at a headless CMS type solution. I previously looked at a tool. Sanity is the next one on the list to try out. And I am still looking for the user management, like I was mentioning with the way Knock handles users. So I am going to play around with Auth0 for the first time. Even though I've known about them for years, I've never actually signed up and used it before. So we'll see how that goes on Friday is my current plan. So, all right. Thanks. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are. Thanks.